Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality in order to demystify spirituality. And today we have Sunshine. Sunshine is a spiritual advisor, Reiki master, amongst many other things, but mainly you're a witch. So I'm really excited to talk about that and dive into it. So I guess my first question is, in modern times, what is a witch, or how would you define that?
You tossed that modern times thing in there, which now I'm like, would I have defined it differently in the past versus now? Uh, so I think a witch is a title that an individual will choose to take uh, when they are dabbling in a combination of what I like to say three different things. So I kind of look at three different pillars. And the first pillar is the pillar of psychic abilities, divination, things of that nature. The second one is magic. So I think when a lot of people associate witch to the magic portion
Mhm.
of it, so magical ritual and ceremony. And the third is the healing,
Mm.
right? And so I believe that a witch is an individual that aligns themselves to all three of those. Now, whether or not they claim that title of a witch might be a different story, but that's how I kind of look at it. Is if you are dabbling in all three of those things, then you are dancing the dance of a witch there. So.
For sure. So I kind of want to dive into each one of those individually because I know that's what you promote a lot. Because when you help people to find their gifts, you talk a lot about the psychic connections, magical connections, as well as healing powers. So really, what's the difference? Because aren't all of those a form of psychic ability?
Oh, that's a. I do. I do believe, and if you were to go look at even some of the more formal, magical or healing type of modalities, you're going to find visualization included in all of them.
Mhm.
But you do not need to have psychic abilities to do visualization,
Mm.
right? So, from a magician's or a magic perspective, the more you're able to visualize or embody the emotion, visualize the result, or embody the emotional state of the result, right? The more likely you're going to have a higher probability of success from a magic perspective. And same thing from a healing component. If you were to think about using visualization for healing, right? Being able to see, white light or golden light or a purple flame, same thing. But there are plenty of folks that practice magic and healing modalities that would never claim to be using their psychic abilities. But to that point, when you do start to talk to them, and you start to engage, a lot of them are. So I'm going to give you an example of the
Mm.
difference. From a magic perspective, if I am talking to the gods and the deities and asking them, what kind of offering may I give you in order to exchange for your help? Right? That's a psychic ability. If I am doing work, which I do a lot of my work up in the astral plane, I'm remote viewing or astral projecting, which are psychic
Mm.
abilities, right? And so I'm doing that work in the astral plane. And from a healing perspective, if I'm using my psychic ability of clairsentience to understand where somebody's aches, pains, or ailments are within their body, right, then I'm using my psychic abilities in my healing practice as well. So not necessary, but boy, oh boy, do you become a much more enriched magician or healer if you are able to tap in and leverage your psychic abilities.
Interesting. So when you're say when you are tapping in and you were talking about being able to see different colors and things like that, is it like a physical sight? Like, do you see like an aura around somebody, or is that something that
You
you're
know, I have talked to so many different people, uh, and there are a handful of individuals that will describe seeing these things in a 3D sense, in a three dimensional, in the actual physics. There are a handful. It is very rare, but there are a handful. Most individuals are going to see this in their third eye, in their mind's eye. And so if I'm going to look at you, Dexter, and you're going to say, hey, what does my aura look like? I am going to see around you, right? You actually have like more green and orange dancing around you right now. Creativity is all with orange, the sacral chakra, green, the heart chakra. So not a surprise here. You're connecting with folks on your podcast, right? That green. So I don't see it physically there, but I can see it, through an etheric kind of like my mind's eye. I've often described it. I remember this one time somebody tried to tell, they're like, I just don't think I get it. I just don't think I get it. And I'm like, we went and pieced back and my guides came through and they're like, it's not a holograph,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we visualize things, it's not like a holograph where you actually have a literal physical image imprinted in the 3D space that we see,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is truly an etheric concept that shows in our mind's eye. So yeah, it's not seeing it. It's not seeing it like as though this pen
Mm-hmm.
exists.
So
That's
it's interesting. So that does really resonate with me because I've been told before that I have more of a greenish aura. Um, but I do love to help people. I love talking to people, so that makes sense to me. But one thing that I really want to touch on is when you said your guides and you were talking about communing with the gods before. So what does that look like? And when you're talking, is this like a form of channeling? Or when you're talking to gods, is it like a particular pantheon of gods? Do you choose the gods you talk to? They just pop in? How does that work?
Oh, that's a lot of questions.
Sorry.
No, 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 no. So I'll say, and just to clarify, I do actually have conversations both with my
Mm,
guides as well as with the deities that I work with. And by conversations, I can hear, right? I can talk and I can hear, and so that is clairaudience. If you're
mm,
actually able to hear things and hear conversations, so I'm able to literally have, I joke that I'm going to create a whole book around all these conversations that I have with these individuals and their personalities. Um, so as far as like working with or choosing to work with, the way that I've always explained it to people is you'll often find that you already are working with them. You just haven't even recognized it. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. For a very, very long time through my life, my favorite color was the color orange. And
mm,
people used to always be like, really? And I the joke was, well, like everybody hates on the color orange. Nobody else says it's their favorite, so I'm going to pick it as my favorite, right? That was kind of the joke. But in reality, what I found out is orange is the color associated to Mercury.
mm,
And so I started to realize the moment that happened, I started to realize all of these ways that he'd been showing up in my life. Like my corporate job, I work with software, I work in technology, I
mm,
work in marketing, I work in communication. I mean, hello, like this man was not just knocking at my door for the last 20 years and saying, here I am,
mm,
right? The moment I started paying attention to him and recognizing him, boy, did things start to shift and change, though.
mm,
So often we'll find that these, whether it's a deity or maybe an angel or something, are already working with us. We, just as we start to become conscious of these other energies around us, we'll start to recognize it. And then, we can start to choose to work with
mm.
them.
Interesting. So I'm not super familiar with the Roman pantheon of deities, but when we look at gods such as Mercury, oftentimes through history, it seems like the gods resemble each other. So like Mercury with Hermes and other forms of messenger gods. So how do you know that it's this particular deity from this pantheon? Do they tell you that, or is it more of a feeling?
No, to me, and this is a personal thing. Every individual is going to have a personal opinion and view on this perspective, and I say lean into your own personal opinion, right?
Yeah.
Um, Mercury is in the Roman pantheon, is also known as Hermes. In the Greek pantheon and the Egyptian pantheon is known as Thoth.
Mhm.
And so, which one shows up and how I reference and choose, they in essence may tell. I'll actually interchange Hermes, Thoth, Mercury in many different ways, especially with ritual. I may call all of their names. I may
Mhm.
proclaim them and invoke them by all, each and every one of their pantheons. Uh,
Mhm.
it's not so much. This is interesting. I just was sharing with some of the. We just ended this huge like 7 day planetary deity work, and so
Mhm.
last week I was sharing with my group, around working with deities, and it's not our human brain loves the personification of a deity.
Mhm.
It's not so much about them as much as recognizing what they represent
Mhm.
and encompassing that energetic in our own work and trying to embody it. So when I am working with Mercury, sure, I can talk to him. My little human brain works better
Mhm.
talking with and conversing with him, and being able to have that back and forth. But at the end of the day, what I'm truly trying to do when I invoke him for magic is embody his expertise and as a communicator, as a negotiator.
Mhm.
Mercury's this phenomenal negotiator, right? You ever out doing some sales, pull him into the mix, right? So it's not so much about one particular pantheon for me, right? Some
Mhm.
people will be very different and they'll be very stringent. They're Norse and they follow the North pan, and that's cool. That's good. I love that, right? But I'm very eclectic and I lean into whatever it is that I'm drawn and called to do at that particular time.
So you talk a lot about magic, and typically it seems when you're invoking these deities, it's through some form of like magical ritual. What exactly is magic?
Mm. There was another. There are probably a handful of different ways that you can word this definition. Magic is intentionally changing energy for your benefit,
Mm.
right? So if we think about everything that in our existence is made up of energy, past, present, and future all included, right? Then in essence, we do magic, we do ritual, we do ceremony, we do a spell or whatever it is that we want to call it in order to change that energetic and bring about an intention that we desired. Um,
Hmm.
and I often get, Dexter, the question this has been teetering through my head on how to share this lately. The difference between like, is there a difference between a magic and a spell, right? Or like a ritual and a spell, I should say. Um, and a ritual is something that you would perform repeatedly, right? So I have
Mhm.
a protection ritual that I do every day, versus a spell is not something that is repeated on a regular basis, but it's all magic. Even a prayer is magic. Even a prayer is magic. So for all, if you happen to have anybody that's, Christian and listens or has a Christian
Mhm.
background, every single time, I grew up Catholic. So every single Our Father, Hail Mary,
Yeah.
every Sunday mass, all of that ritual and prayer, it's all magic.
It's funny because I was talking to someone relatively recently about Catholicism, and we were talking about a similar topic as far as magic and invocations. And I brought up the fact that, well, Catholicism is very rich with a lot of rituals, and there's a lot of invocation of deities. Now, you have your overall deity, God, but then you also invoke the name of different. Um, oh, it just escaped my mind what I was trying to talk about. But the different bishops and like Hail Mary, as you were saying before,
Oh
prophets.
yeah.
So the different prophets and different people who actually help you in this particular faith. So there's really not that big of a difference. We just use different
No.
words, different
Oh
terminology.
yeah. I 100%. And so when we talk, we're mentioning the pantheons. You can go and look at every single one of the Roman, Greek, Egyptian, whatever. Every one of these pantheon is also going to have an angel or an archangel in the
Hmm.
actual Christian belief system that is associated in the same way.
Right. So why do you think there's such a stigma with the word magic and witchcraft?
I I think that the human ego
Mm,
is always trying to keep us safe, right? Always trying to keep us safe. And for some folks, that ego will try to keep us safe in ways that, how do I put this? It believes is the best, right? So when we think about Christianity, Catholicism, any of these religious backgrounds, all that is, it's creating a bunch of social norms, cultural norms within those particular beliefs, and belief systems, and they're sharing it, and its intention is 100% meant to just keep people safe and
mhm,
allow them to understand what it's like to live a good life and to be a good person, to be a good human being, right? And on the surface level, none of these religious systems have any type of fault in them. They're
mhm.
actually very, very beautiful when you look at them just for what they are. It is only when you introduce the human into the mix and the ego into the mix that you start to have individuals step into positions of power and start to contort the belief systems to support their own agendas. And so I think magic and witchcraft is a very individual and solitary thing, and it does not align with the power that these folks in those positions want to have over other individuals. So it becomes a threat.
I 100% agree with you on a lot of those aspects. I was actually doing research for another show the other day, and I got really curious about why is it that at one point these practices were taught, right? They used to teach these in universities back during the times of like Plato and Socrates, and they had their own universities where they taught philosophy from more of a metaphysical, universal standpoint, and then it stopped. So I actually got really curious about that. I will make a video on it. But right now, we're going to take a really quick commercial break. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So, a moment ago, you were talking a lot about ego getting in the way of really showing I'll say, kind of the truth between things and having people access their own abilities. So, when we talk about ego death, what is ego death, and is that something you oftentimes work people through?
What is an ego death? Well, first off, I'll say that I think as a human that is on a spiritual evolutionary path, you're going to experience many ego deaths throughout your life, right? These times that the universe comes and slaps you in the face and says, yep, you're human, but you got to let all of that go, right? Um, an ego death is this moment where we truly recognize our humanity and are no longer willing to hold on to it as
Mhm.
being what's special.
Interesting. It's funny. I love what you said about how people have more than one ego death throughout their lifetime, because that's 100% true. When I talk to people about going through like the dark night of the soul or whatever you want to call it, it happens multiple times. It's not like you have one spiritual awakening and then you're done. As we incarnate as humans, you continuously have them throughout your life until you pass on to the spirit world, and we figure out whether or not you have more lessons to learn here on this side. But what does that have to do with shadow work, or is that anything related to shadow work?
Mhm. It very much so. I think it has everything to do, right? Because, and I'll say, so whenever I sit down with folks at like a psychic fair and they've never sat with a psychic before, I explain there are three areas we look at. And so bear with me for this little bit of a long answer. We can go into love and health, love and relationship, money and finance, or we can go into health. And health I break down into mental, physical, and spiritual health. The way that I explain spiritual health is I said, if you ever have anything in your life that you've been trying to change, accomplish, transform, move through, work through, anything of that nature, and it's still plaguing you here today, it's very likely that you have something in the spiritual health perspective. And that's it right there. The moment you are saying, hey, there's something I'm not cool with, I don't like, I'm uncomfortable, there's something strange, there's something on the other side, I don't feel like I'm living my life's purpose, right? The moment you start to seek answers, you are doing shadow work. You are willing to step into the darker part of yourself, right? Carl Jung introduced this concept of the shadow that basically says there are things that we have not looked at in our life up until this point,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it is often through that process that the ego will die, where we'll look into it and we'll go, for example, my dark night of the soul was me getting sober, stop drinking alcohol. And I had to look into it, and that shadow work was a lot of, why am I doing this? Why am I continuing? Why? And I mean, we're talking about 2 years. Probably two solid years of that before I was willing to admit that I was an alcoholic, right? That's some deep work, and to the point of like willing to surrender and say, you know what, I need help, I can't do this on my own, right? And that was a big ego death, to admit that I needed help stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you
Wow.
did.
So I love how you brought up Carl Jung, and I agree when it comes to really trying to work through something that's been plaguing you for quite a long time. You have to recognize that you need that help and then go out and actively seek it. But the other side of that is true again to what you said. It's sometimes difficult to do because it's more of a spiritual thing that's holding you back. Or perhaps it has something to do with your ancestry and generational trauma. And it might not even be something that occurred to you in your physical life, but it's still affecting and plaguing you. But to that point, what are your thoughts on ancestral work, spiritual traumas that might have gotten crossed into this current lifetime?
Oh my. I think that there are a lot of us that are holding on to, ancestral trauma. I can't remember what I watched recently, but if you think about just, we go back 3 generations. Three
Mm-hmm.
generations ago, went through World War II, went through the Holocaust, went through one man in power that thought it was appropriate to kill millions of other human beings. If you don't think that every single one of us walking this planet right now are holding on to some bit of trauma and discomfort from just even that alone, let alone all of the other things that may have, experienced lifetimes ago. All right. And this is what I say to people. I said, when you have tried, when you've wanted to, right, and you've put in all of that effort, right? You've been with the therapist, and you've worked through the childhood trauma, and you recognize this, and you've got the good boundaries, and you still can't. Something is still, there's still resistance, there's still blockage, there's still unexplained fear. And 100% that is typically where it is an ancestral, right? Coming through, or even a past life. So ancestral meaning your family has passed it down, past life meaning some lifetime that you've lived many moons ago.
No, it's really interesting because I've talked to a lot of people who do some form of various spiritual coaching or intuitive coaching. And it always seems as if a lot of their clients, I should say always, but a lot of their clients tend to be individuals who exhausted the other resources, who went through the traditional Western medicine route, went through the psychological route, and said, none of this is working for me. And I'm just going to try something else. And that tends to be a form of alternative medicine and healing. Why do you think that it's not the other way around? Why do you think that people
Mm.
come towards alternative health first instead of the Western medicine?
Well, let's be fair and say, why do folks here in the Western culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because my guess is, if we were to go into some of the more Eastern, Chinese, where it's already built into the literal medical practice, right? So culturally speaking, the moment we're born here over in, I don't know if you're in the United States, but I'm in the United States, right? The moment we're born, we're introduced to the Western medical system,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've got vaccines, we've got to come back for all. It's just, it is, we have groomed this society to turn to Western medicine as the first answer.
Mhm.
right? And you think about, if you go and look, I can't, it's been a minute since I've seen the stats, but it's something along the lines of like the amount of folks that have been leaving the church year after year for the last like 5 years is like pretty astronomical. It's like the biggest drop that they've seen
Mhm.
in the census in like since they started keeping the census. I'm pretty positive,
Mhm.
right? And so it's just culturally speaking, we don't do that. So we go and we say, hey, let's first try to tackle this from a body. What are the
Mhm.
physical ailments? Let's look at the hormones. Let's look at the blood sugar. Let's look at the chemicals, right? Physical,
Mhm.
right? All the robot stuff. Cool, awesome. We've got a lot of really great mechanics, aka doctors, that have
Mhm.
been practicing and learning for last 150 years, and then maybe 200 years, probably medicine as it is right now, maybe even 300 years. We've
Mhm.
got the mental. So you think about Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, these two incredible individuals, along with all of their peers way back in the day, started all of that. So we're like 125 years from now. We
Mhm.
are now, the way I look at it, we are in the point that we've exhausted the body, we've exhausted the mind. There is no other place to turn but then
Mhm.
to look at the actual spirit here now, to look at trying to heal the spirit. And, the more people, it's funny because you'll find that when people start stepping into this, right, we've got our physical body, our mental body, our energetic, our spiritual body. Yes. And you will start to see like the whole chakra wonder. I mean, our energetic centers, if we
Mhm.
bring them into alignment and in balance, it can benefit our physical, it can benefit our mental, and it absolutely benefits our spiritual, right? So, yeah, I don't know why in the world outside of social conditioning. That is it.
I 100% agree with you, but unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. Please, everybody, go check out her website at Sunshiner Reading. That's it, right? Sunshine Reading
Mhm.
.com, and she gives a lot of classes about everything that we've talked about today. And everybody have a great one. Bye.